Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Friday to everyone. We have a great show for you today and a great special guest host for you all. Republican campaign strategist and political analyst, Erin McGuire. My friend, we work together a lot at News Nation on the Hill.
We do. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome to the show. I'm going to tell you about her resume. She's worked as a communications director for Ted Cruz, national press secretary for Majority Leader John Thune, and former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and has also worked for President Trump in 2020, Governor Ron DeSantis, Senator Ron Johnson, and former Speaker Paul Ryan. Lots on her resume here. So she's prepared to have these conversations with me. We're going to get into it.
And coming up on Rising, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testified in the House Oversight Committee's investigation into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. We'll dig into that.
Plus, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani had a surprise meeting with President Trump where the two discussed housing.
And a major development in the battle for Warner Brothers as Paramount has emerged victorious over Netflix in that acquisition battle. But first, Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
I couldn't believe that Paramount thing.
I know.
We'll get into that. Here's the headline. As the Washington Post first reported, pro-Trump activists who say they're coordinating with the White House are circulating a draft executive order urging President Trump to declare a national emergency over the 2020 election, based on a claim that China interfered and used that emergency to take sweeping control over how Americans vote in the midterms. Let's slow that down. I know that was a lot. The draft would empower a president to ban mail-in voting and voting machines, arguing they're vulnerable to foreign interference. But U.S. intelligence reviews in 2021 concluded that while China considered influence efforts, it did not carry them out. There's no credible evidence that foreign interference altered the 2020 outcome at all. And here's the constitutional reality. The Elections Clause explicitly gives states, not the president, authority over how elections are run. Article 1, Section 4 is clear. States set the rules. Congress can step in. The president has no role. As Michael McNulty, a policy director for pro-democracy group Issue 1 put it, quote, "The Constitution is absolutely clear. The president does not have legal authority to unilaterally change election rules. Any attempt by the White House to do so would contradict the Constitution and would almost certainly be struck down by the courts." But this isn't happening in a vacuum. So for months, there's been a broader drive to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the 2026 midterms. In his State of the Union, the president falsely claimed that the, quote, only way Democrats get elected is to cheat. He's pushing the SAVE Act in Congress and has openly floated acting alone if lawmakers don't comply. At the same time, we've seen federal law enforcement step into election spaces in ways that raise alarms, including an FBI raid on election offices in Fulton County, Georgia. Intelligence Chief Tulsi Gabbard was present, despite her office having no formal role in election administration. The message to local officials feels unmistakable. If we don't like the outcome of an election, we may come looking. And here's what's often that gets left out of the conversation about this, quote, massive fraud. The Heritage Foundation, you know, the right-wing think tank famous for pulling together the controversial Project 2025, tracked election fraud cases over 25 years in some cases. And in the state of Arizona, for example, they found a rate of 0.0000845% of fraud with no election outcome altered. Both parties have lawyers inside these counting rooms. To believe widespread fraud exists, you have to believe armies of Republican and Democratic attorneys are either incompetent or complicit. That's not reality. A recent Washington Post ABC News poll shows a majority of Americans, including independents, oppose a federal takeover of election administration. This moment is bigger than one executive order. It's about whether we normalize the idea that a president can declare an emergency whenever he doesn't trust the outcome of an election. That's not election security, that's executive overreach. Now, facts matter, the Constitution matters, and confidence in our election depends actually on leaders respecting both, even when the results do not go their way. So I want to talk about this because I think when I saw this, and obviously the president has an option to take up this suggested executive order, but I think it starts to fall in line with the conversations that we've seen recently around the SAVE Act or around the way that the election has all this fraud with migrants that came here illegally voting. And the numbers just don't support that, even in the Heritage Foundation's past research.
So I think there are a couple of different things happening here. One, the SAVE Act in and of itself includes voter identification, and over 80% of Americans support having ID to be able to vote and making sure you are a U.S. citizen to vote. Now, there are plenty of states run by Democrats all across the country that allow non-citizens to vote. And for that, you undermine election integrity. Now, I take your point and I agree. There's no proof of widespread fraud. And in 2020, though, there were plenty of states, Wisconsin included, that altered or changed their election laws in real time without consent from elected bodies to put their hands on the scale of the election. That I actually fully believe, especially in Wisconsin when it came to getting ballots out to infirmed individuals who couldn't come in. That was a massive overreach. The president loves to conflate all of it to make it as confusing as possible. And right now, this is just outside chatter, though. This is just other people saying, oh, we're talking to the White House. Look at what we're doing. The White House isn't putting this out. Yes, the president continues to say what he always says, and I don't agree with it, that Democrats cheat to win. Democrats have altered rules, as I pointed out in Wisconsin in 2020, to try and, I believe in that case, to make it easier for other people to vote as a Democrat, not as a Republican. So should we have election integrity and security? Absolutely. We should have full faith and confidence, but that doesn't mean that the federal government should come in, because what works for a New York voting system is not the same as what's going to work for an Oklahoma voter.
I think the scare or the alarming part to me is just recently on the anniversary of January 6th, we still have a president that, and Robbie's argument is always he genuinely believes that he won that election. But we have a president that's misleading on government sites what actually happened that day. And,
What do you mean?
He put up a site for January 6th anniversary, basically saying that he was the true winner of the election. It was a government site. And when he pardoned all the people from January 6th, he gave them almost a pat on the back, like, yes, you were in service honoring something that we know to be true. He's never conceded the actual election. And so when you don't, acknowledge that our voting systems and the way that our country votes works and that these results are true, even though there's been plenty of results in the past that people have waited to come forward and concede or gotten frustrated about. I mean, we remember like the many times in our history where it's been down to the needle. I just think the president at this point, now that we're in 2026, he's won again, fair and square, should acknowledge that he didn't win in 2020.
I have heard tape before of the president acknowledging that he didn't win in 2020. I have heard that before. Now, it's not his top line, and it's certainly not one people continue to pull up from him, but it's a fact. He knows Joe Biden served a term, and that's why he's president again. But it is okay to ask questions about the administration of elections. And I have heard Democrats on other channels and other networks say, oh, well, they're going to send in poll watchers now. That is not a boogeyman. And I feel like Democrats are taking some easy things that are meant to secure elections and making them into Republican boogeymans when they don't need to be. Poll watchers, that's been done for decades by campaigns on both sides of the aisle. We don't need to pretend that those hysterics are real. And we certainly don't need to pretend that because I'm a woman and I got married, that now I'm too dumb to be able to change my name to go vote. And that's what Democrats continue to espouse.
Well, I think that there's more nuance to that conversation.
I don't know
right?
how many times
if they're asking you to have a passport and they're asking you to have a birth certificate, tell me, do you know where your birth certificate is?
I do.
Because I'm not sure that I do.
I know where my birth certificate is, and I had to change my my name on my social security number to be able to register my driver's license. Like, there are steps you have to take to legally change your name that don't preclude the opportunity to vote.
But also, if you're asking for a passport and someone doesn't have their birth certificate, then what? Are you paying the $60 and covering that fee to make sure that passports become attainable to the 10% of people, according to the census, that are living underneath the poverty line?
And I think states can absolutely figure out how to adjudicate that process to make sure people have forms of identification. But identification, you can't rent a car, you can't cash a check, you can't go into a hotel room, you can't travel without identification. It is not so unfathomable that pulling out a form of ID that says, this is me, I get to cast this vote, will somehow upend and make elections less secure.
We're going to keep talking about this. Hillary Clinton testified before the House Oversight Committee regarding her alleged relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. What she had to say to the committee next. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton answered questions yesterday from the House Oversight Committee in a long-awaited deposition over her alleged connection to Jeffrey Epstein. This comes after she and her husband, former President Bill Clinton, initially refused to testify, and the committee threatened to hold them in contempt.
Now, the deposition was closed to everyone except the committee, but that didn't stop the sparks from flying even before the first questions could be asked. Secretary Clinton posted her explosive opening statement to her X account, writing in part, quote, "I had no idea about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal activities. I do not recall ever encountering Mr. Epstein. I never flew on his plane or visited his island, homes, or offices. I have nothing to add to that." She went on to slam the committee and President Trump, writing, quote, "Instead, you have compelled me to testify fully aware that I have no knowledge that would assist your investigation in order to distract from attention from President Trump's actions and to cover them up despite legitimate calls for answers."
The deposition itself lasted roughly 6 hours, during which a photo of Clinton was leaked online. That photo was taken by Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. Clinton later criticized the release of the photo, saying this to reporters.
We had a bit of a challenge in the beginning because we had agreed upon rules based on the fact it was going to be a closed hearing at their demand, and one of the members violated that rule. We had to cease the hearing for a period of time until we could get assurances that no rules would be broken going forward.
But Boebert pushed back on Clinton's suggestion that she violated the rules. During an appearance on The Hill's sister network, News Nation, she told Chris Cuomo that the photo was taken before the deposition began.
I did ask permission of committee staff, and I was told that I could release a photo during the break. And we missed that break by just a few minutes. It was a photo. It was taken before the hearing had began, and it wasn't released at the break time. And now we have come to an agreement that no members or staff will take pictures in the hearing.
Meantime, Clinton maintained that she didn't have any new information for the committee.
I answered every one of their questions as fully as I could, based on what I knew, and what I knew is what I said in my statement this morning. I never met Jeffrey Epstein, never had any connection or communication with him. I knew Ghislaine Maxwell casually as an acquaintance.
Republicans, on the other hand, had a different view of what was gleaned from the deposition. Here's Committee Chair James Comer.
I think this was a productive deposition today. I think we learned a lot. There were a lot of questions that we asked that we weren't satisfied with the answers that we got.
I would just say one of the things I learned today is if you really have specific questions about the Clinton Global Initiative or the relationship between the Clintons and Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, you got to ask Bill Clinton.
And that's a great point. The number of times that she said, "I don't know, you'll have to ask my husband," was more than a dozen.
Former President Bill Clinton is set to be deposed by the committee today, but they may not be done with depositions after the Clintons. Chair Comer said yesterday that it's, quote, "very possible that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick may be called to testify as to his interactions with the notorious sex offender." As of this morning, it's still unclear if or when Lutnick might be deposed. Look, I was happy when they said that they were going to possibly depose Lutnick. I think that if Bill Clinton needs to come forth and testify, then he should. But I think that the way that Hillary is throwing it towards, her husband and Trump.
Throwing it or throwing Bill under the bus
Well,
a dozen times.
Yeah, but I mean, Trump and Bill Clinton to me have a similar repeated association with Epstein specifically.
Trump wasn't on that plane as many times as Bill Clinton.
As many times, but
and Bill Clinton,
Hillary wasn't on the plane at all.
Right, but Ghislaine Maxwell was honored by the Clinton Global Initiative in 2010, after Epstein had already been convicted of crimes. And so for them to pretend like, oh, I don't know what's going on, is a fallacy. And an investigation should include conversations with Hillary. She is a major figure in politics in this country and deeply close to her husband. Everybody remembers during the first Clinton administration how there was all this talk about Hillary was really the one behind the scenes getting the policy done. And so for her to act like, oh, well, I don't know, I'm just an innocent bystander, I can tell you this much. There are few people in the country as practiced as defending Bill Clinton and all of his anarchy as Hillary.
Well, I'm not going to throw all that on her plate. I think that we need to look at every elected official, every powerful man around this case that has been implicated with communicating with a known sexual predator after 2008. I think it's a problem. When we talk about the relationship with Hillary and inviting her to her daughter, Ghislaine to her daughter's wedding, I mean, I think Hillary was Bill was close friends with a guy named Ted Waite, who was another billionaire that was dating Ghislaine Maxwell. So they both came to the wedding. So there's like convoluted about how much they might know each other, which is fine. And I don't care about it. I think the framing is missing something critical. We're leaving out the fact that this is not a spectacle about who's more implicated, Trump or Biden or Hillary, or I don't care about that. I think that people want to understand how this man was able to operate with impunity for so long under your administration, not
under everybody,
under everybody, under
Totally.
a Democratic administration, Republican. And I think that when we do this, we are making a mockery, right? If we don't have real questions, it seems like they had real questions. But
for Hillary, who made a mockery of it, right? Who stood there and said, like, I said the same thing over and over again. Yeah, but Hillary, this is an investigation, and you should want the answers as much as everybody else. And so for
as
her
a
to
woman
say,
especially.
yeah, and she's standing there saying, like, I shouldn't have been dragged in here. I didn't know anything. That's how investigations work, Hillary. You ask questions.
Well, she also asked, and I think very respectfully, that this can be public and seen by the public.
We don't need to make it a spectacle.
Well,
and she would absolutely.
It's already a spectacle when it's private. I mean, they talked to Ghislaine Maxwell privately. We'll never know what conversations were happening with the Trump administration and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now they're talking to Hillary Clinton privately. Now it's he said, she said.
But
we have
put out the full
millions
video
of
from
files
hers and from Bill's.
But
They've already said they're going to.
They've said, but we have millions of files that they said they were going to release, and 2.5 million that haven't been released. So right now they're actively breaking the law. So I'm just trying to make sure that we get all the information. Like if we're going to depose Bill and Hillary, let's definitely make sure it's on the books that we see these things, because I don't want this to be a dog and pony show where we're just pointing fingers at who's more associated with a known, sex offender.
Right.
That's not a good contest.
Well, I think because to your point though, they're talking about bringing Lutnick in. They're talking about bringing in Republicans, cabinet members, officials from both sides of the aisle, and that should give the American people pause and hope to say this is an actual thorough investigation. And let's remember, Bill and Hillary didn't want to go and testify. They had to be compelled by Democrats and Republicans to show up to this. And for them to decide that they are bigger and better than everybody else, to not have to answer questions when there was clear association and relationship there, we should have every bit of information. We should have every knowledge so that criminals can be held to account and that victims get justice. And so is it a slow, arduous process? Yes. Do the documents need to get out? Yes. But do redactions need to be made for security purposes and for victims? Absolutely. And I have no problem with the fact that this takes a long time because it's been under multiple administrations.
But included in that list must be President Trump as well. Yes, you would say that he should also be deposed.
Not necessarily. His relationship with him ended well before his time when he was a convicted sex offender. The president doesn't have a reason to be deposed. He doesn't need to prove his innocence to the American people. We have to prove guilt in this country, and nothing in those files as of this point points to any inappropriate action by President Trump. Bill Clinton, 20 some odd times on the Lolita Express, there are absolute questions that can be asked.
Well, I think that we should get all the information that the public is asking for now that this has become a public investigation for many, and we're releasing the files. And that if Bill Clinton is going to be deposed and Hillary, who maybe has less of an association, then certainly the president can also at least release a written statement that has to do with his deposition.
I feel like he has put out a lot.
He says I'm fully exonerated. That's all.
Well, he is, because there's no proof of guilt. You don't prove innocence.
But we recently had a conversation about the FBI withholding information directly related to the president that they didn't withhold for other people. So there's an extra protection happening for the president in an agency that's supposed to be autonomous.
And if that is the case, then absolutely that information should be out there. But if just because there is a name in the files does not implicate guilt, and I saw Democrats rush to the floor and dox people and put people's names out there and say they were part of the Epstein files and attack innocent Americans. We all need to let cooler heads prevail here, and I know justice is the cause, but let's not act insane.
All right, we're going to keep talking about this. Up next, the U.S. and Iran had talks yesterday regarding Tehran's nuclear program as the U.S. weighs another possible strike. Don't go anywhere. U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is reportedly urging the U.S. Embassy of Jerusalem's workers that if they'd like to evacuate the country, they should do so immediately. As the U.S. weighs another strike on Iran, the New York Times reports that Huckabee sent an email on Friday that reads in part, quote, "There is no need to panic, but for those desiring to leave, it's important to make plans to depart sooner rather than later." Huckabee added, quote, "Focus on getting a seat to any place from which you can then continue travel to D.C. But the first priority will be getting expeditiously out of country." Of course, Israel could be a target if Iran were to respond to a U.S. strike.
Meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance is trying to ease any concerns that strikes on Iran would lead to another long war in the Middle East. In an interview with the Washington Post, Vance told the outlet that everyone prefers diplomacy, but that it all depends on Iran. He added, quote, "I do think we have to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. I also think that we have to avoid overlearning the lessons of the past. Just because one president screwed up a military conflict does not mean we can never engage in military conflict again. We've got to be careful about it, but I think the president is being careful."
The U.S. and Iran held talks in Geneva over Tehran's nuclear program on Thursday, but the two sides walked away without a deal. The AP reports that before those talks ended, Iranian state media said that Tehran was determined to continue enriching uranium.
The country of Oman mediated the talks between the two, and the country's foreign minister said that, quote, "significant progress was made."
So I think the stakes are just getting heightened each day, right? And I know that most of the country does not want to get involved in a foreign conflict. I think Geneva seemed like it's the last chance at diplomacy because we're seeing, positionings change, conversations and emails that are coming out that should really raise alarm and red flags. And I feel like we're at a strategic fork in the road where we really have to unpack and step back and say, why exactly? Like, explain to the American people we are getting involved in this. Because I understand that Israel is our ally, but are we certainly doing that because we think that's the best thing for the country in our allyship? Or are we overly protecting Israel in a situation that's not even dire? Because I don't think Iran was even close to nuclear capabilities. I mean, we bombed their facilities and they're starting back at zero at this point.
But that's not to say at the time when the facilities were bombed that they weren't close to nuclear proliferation. And I don't know that the United States ever overprotects Israel. That is our greatest ally in the Middle East, and they are continuously told that they have no national sovereignty, that they should not exist as a country, and that they should be eradicated to the sea, right? You hear this intifada where they want to take out the Jewish state. So we cannot do enough, honestly, to protect Israel. We help with the Iron Dome, we have helped them again, and we let them lead, and we support them. But Iran's nuclear threat is not just Israeli-based. It is globally based. And Iran has been a terrible actor throughout. If you go back to the JCPOA under Obama, where there was a sunset provision, all they thought was, we just have to wait out the clock. We don't have to let nuclear regulators in. And they lied to the world, and they were close. They keep getting closer. And so now they shouldn't have any nuclear proliferation or uranium enrichment at all. And now they're trying to say, oh, well, it's just, we want to make sure that we can have nuclear energy. Bull. Absolute bull. No one should believe Iran for a second. And the fact that talks continue is Iran kicking the can down the road. And so for President Trump, I call him the FAFO, the F around and find out president. He has shown Iran that we are not afraid to strike within your country. Israel provided the air support for us to be able to do that previously. We have a big military movement there. There will be a difference between, I believe, a strike on Iran and actual boots on the ground military involvement. And that will be a differentiation. I don't think President Trump will cross that line.
I think that before he crosses any line, he needs to speak to Congress. He cannot bypass them in this instance. We've had too many instances just in the last year alone where he decided that Congress doesn't need to be involved, whether we talk about Venezuela and recategorizing that as counterterrorism or counter-narcotics instead of counterterrorism, which would go through Congress. He's done a lot of different things like that. And I think that we need to make sure that we at least have Congress involved to have the conversation, because we saw what happened in the Middle East historically. And I know we can't base everything off history, but most of America who believed in his America First promise that he guaranteed to the country on the campaign trail doesn't want to get another war or conflict in the Middle East.
Well, for that, all you have to say is that unless Democrats like Barack Obama and Joe Biden, who all of their own accord make military strikes and incursions in a similar fashion to President Trump, unless we were all saying at that time that they need to be dragged in front of Congress to be able to do this, I don't want to hear about it about President Trump. He's not putting boots on the ground. We are not starting a full-out war. Tactically speaking, being able to hit just one location is a good thing for the president to be able to do. And these precision strikes he has done, Maduro was a narco-terrorist. Taking him out was a good thing. We should celebrate the fact that we can do this without boots on the ground.
All right, we got to leave it there. Up next, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani. He met with President Trump at the White House yesterday. The two took a photo and it's making waves on social media. Let's stick around to talk about that.
New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani had another meeting with President Trump on Thursday. It was the second time Mamdani has visited the White House since being elected mayor.
He called the meeting, quote, productive, as he and Trump discussed making housing more affordable in New York City. And a photo of the two in the Oval Office went pretty viral. In the photo, Trump can be seen holding up a pair of newspapers. One of them is a famous headline from a 1975 issue of the New York Daily News. It reads, quote, Ford to city, drop dead, and was published after then President Gerald Ford refused to bail out NYC as it was on the brink of bankruptcy. The other newspaper in the photo reads, Trump to city, let's build. Mamdani's office confirmed that they created this one to give to Trump as a gift.
Following the meeting, Mamdani's office told reporters that the mayor pitched President Trump on a project that could deliver an estimated 12,000 new units. They say it would mark one of the biggest federal investments in housing in decades.
Now, this meeting was not announced ahead of time. We all were surprised. So when Mamdani posted the photo of him and Trump, it quickly lit up social media. Many people, both on the left and the right, offered praise to Mamdani for seemingly establishing a pretty good relationship with Trump. Republican consultant Frank Luntz said, quote, if Zohran and Trump can work together, the rest of us have no excuse not to do the same. Writer Josh Billinson says, quote, it takes real homework to know that the key to Trump's heart is a fake front page about him from a popular publication for display in his office. And left-wing streamer Hassan Piker writes, quote, let 1,000 Zohrans bloom. The countryside yearns for it.
And there was another development that came out of the meeting. Mamdani says he shared his concerns about a Columbia University student who was detained by ICE, triggering protests on the school's campus. Mamdani then confirmed after the meeting that Trump agreed to release the student. He wrote on X, quote, just got off the phone with President Trump. In our meeting earlier, I shared my concerns about Columbia student Elima Aguwava, who was detained by ICE this morning. He just informed me that she will be released imminently.
Now, Aguyeva later posted on her personal Instagram saying, quote, I am safe and okay, and adding that she was in complete shock from the experience.
I feel bad for her. I really butchered her name there.
It's okay. We were all trying to figure it out before the show. Let's just start with Mamdani, because I think people get confused about the way that politics work, right? There is never a time I can remember in my adult or younger life where there wasn't variety of different people with variety of different perspectives that had enough power to either stop a law from passing or pushing it through. And so working across the aisle is something that you have to do, no matter how much you don't like the president or whomever is in charge in that capacity. So I think what Mamdani is doing is really smart. He has a lot of tact. And I think that what the president is doing is really smart, because Mamdani and young people are interested in what the new in the future looks like. And it can't look like these older people that are stuck in their ways that are not doing anything. I mean, Congress has been polled as the most ineffective branch of government for years.
It earns it.
Yeah, and it's not like I'm trying to make anybody feel any grace for that. But Mamdani is representing like a new era. Like, I can talk tough just as you. I don't have to make it my whole life to talk about you on social media. I mean, Newsom's going a different route, and I think it's hilarious, by the way. But he's going into that. He's going a different route. But Mamdani, he did it during the campaign when it was necessary for him to punch back or even start with Trump. And now he's like, okay, I need to get to work. And so working requires conversation.
It does. And that's one thing. I will give Zohran Mamdani credit. The man knows the audience. He knows his audience. He shows up to Trump. And even when they're having the first meeting at the White House, the president, he was like, well, and Mamdani's like, oh, you can say it about, he's a socialist, right? Like, they had a good banter already. It was clear that they had been able to kind of break that down. And so to see him show up with a prop for the president, yes, know your audience, know who you're trying to sell your message to. And so I give him all the credit in the world of that. They clearly don't agree on much.
Right.
But it also shows Democrats that when you put your big boy pants on and you call the White House and you engage in a conversation with the president, you can change outcomes. And it doesn't even have to be a Democrat. It can be Muriel Bowser, right? She said, President Trump, come on in, step in. You can send the National Guard here. We could use the help. And crime came down in Washington, D.C. You can say that about Governor Kelly Ayotte up in New Hampshire, who is a Republican, but who called the White House, engaged the White House and the president, and said, we don't want an ICE DHS holding facility here in New Hampshire. And what do you know? It didn't happen. For all of the hysterics of the Tim Walzes and the Gavin Newsoms and the thirsty 30 trying to run for 2028 in the Democrat Party, if they actually wanted to lead, all you got to do is phone the White House.
And I think that's a valid perspective, that the people that have, some people look at it as bend the knee or just do their job, give a call, have had pretty effective communication with the president. But I also think as the leader of our country, right, sometimes the president can also pick up the phone. And I would urge for Republicans to hold him to task on that and not make such drastic decisions. Like, and Robbie and I go back and forth about who started it with sanctuary cities and why we're in this position in Minnesota. But at the same time, if he just would have called Walz, it seems like they had that conversation way too late. And Tom Homan stepped in. And why did they have that then?
Because
why have it on social media for all of us to decipher?
Because Tim Walz didn't know his audience. Compared to Zohran, who doesn't go bombastic after the president, he has a conversation. That's the difference. Tim Walz immediately and Jacob Fry went in front of the camera, started throwing out expletives, losing their ever-loving mind, and allowing riots to reign in these cities. And so for them to sit there and say, like, well, why isn't the White House talking to me? Because the first point of conversation you had with the president was to call him a bigot and a racist and be horrible to him. If you called him and just had that sideline conversation, but Democrats are so thirsty for the grandstanding, for the clip, that they can put into a fundraising email.
If the president would have called them, then two American citizens might not be dead right now, right? So
if Tim Walz had enforced law and order in his city, those citizens would not be dead. But what he allowed was violent riots and people to impede legal law enforcement actions and efforts in this country. My heart breaks for people who lose loved ones. That is a terribly difficult thing. No American should have to die. That is a hard stop. Tim Walz is the exact reason why those two people are dead, not Donald Trump.
Well, I think when Tom Homan goes to Minnesota and largely pulls out ICE agents there and says, here we are, I'm restructuring what we're doing, and we have he says vaguely agreed upon some terms. And Tim Walz is telling us, what have you agreed upon? Because the jails and the prisons are operating in the same way.
It sounds like nobody talks to Tim Walz.
Well, it seems like, but it's saying that nothing changed is what he's saying about our policy. We were holding people up to 2 weeks in prisons for the federal government anyway.
But they weren't letting them into the facilities to get the people.
But they're saying that's not true.
So they have to just wait outside for 2 weeks.
They're saying that's not true.
They walk into their hands like, gotcha this time.
They're saying nothing is changing about the policy. So for Tim Walz to now evacuate the city, now we're going by he said, she said, and they're still there. And if you're saying that the adamant behavior and the online tough talk is what made us get to this point of no return, we're still there because they're saying nothing changed.
It's not the point of no return, though. It's not the point of no return because Tom Homan went in and changed the strategy. You can't say it's the point of no return because we've seen this administration step in, and make changes when they needed to. So,
create the problem and send the solution is a terrible thing.
No, create the problem.
Create the problem by sending ICE.
I'm sorry, how many millions and billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse have we seen in Minnesota just within this year come to light? And then they allow these violent riots. But you said the president likes to conflate
every issue. Can we separate those two? Because waste, fraud, and abuse was happening after the pandemic across the country. A lot of people are in jail for it right now.
Yeah,
right, in every
absolutely.
State.
But billions and billions of dollars in Minnesota, and when the president says step up and clean it up, Tim Walz begins to grandstand again to try to run for president. If he wants to be a leader, Tim Walz, he better step up and start acting like it, because all he is doing is trying to drive clicks, drive headlines, and get low dollar donors to try to fuel him to run again in 2028. It's so politically motivated. If he cared about the safety of his community, he would allow federal law enforcement to do their job with local law enforcement. And instead, he told local law enforcement to stand down while DHS and ICE were doing their job, and it led to violent riots. If they want security, they need to step up.
I've been critical of Tim Walz and extremely critical of Fry, but I also think that the president has to act like a president sometimes and just be the big kid.
Maybe he did. He sent Tom Homan in.
Yeah, as Tom Homan comes in and is adamantly doing something totally different than the president has done this whole time.
He is
to decide that after two Americans die, he sends Tom Homan in. I just feel like it's a little late to send Tom Homan in.
Well, Tim Walz should have done a better job of sending law enforcement into his community to protect his citizens, and instead he allowed violent riots and people to get in impeding law enforcement. That woman hit that officer with a vehicle.
We're still looking into that.
I don't know what you mean. Look into it.
We're trying to have an impartial investigation look into it, and the federal government is impeding that process.
No, they are allowing Minnesota people to be involved in this, but it is
after weeks of going back and forth, right?
Jurisdiction. It is federal jurisdiction. So them getting in it is them getting in the way, which all of a sudden now Tim Walz wants law enforcement involved when before, they can't help anything at the federal level. It is politically motivated.
Transparency has to be key to this whole thing, right? The American public is watching how we handle immigration. The American public was extremely critical of Biden, saying they wanted immigration reform. The American public has been polled a lot about this a lot lately, saying they don't like the tactics that ICE is currently using. So we have to take that all into account, and they want to see what happened. So whether we come up with an impartial investigation and say Renee Good hit the officer, whether we come up with an impartial investigation and say Alex Preddy was killed for no reason, we need to have these impartial investigations come
agree.
to fruition so we
But
can all understand what happened there.
But that doesn't mean that the local law enforcement has jurisdiction over a federal investigation.
All right, we'll leave it there. FBI Director Kash Patel revealing Thursday that his phone records were subpoenaed by the Biden DOJ. His response is coming up. Stay with us. FBI Director Kash Patel revealing Thursday that the Bureau, while under President Biden's administration, subpoenaed both his phone records and those of the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, both of whom were private citizens at the time.
Patel says investigators obtained records that detailed timing and recipients of calls made between 2020 and 2023 as part of the federal investigation into whether President Trump improperly stored classified documents at his home in Mar-a-Lago. In response to Patel's revelations, Wiles reportedly told associates that she was, quote, in shock. Patel himself offered harsh criticism of the subpoenas, saying in a statement to Axios, quote, "It is outrageous and deeply alarming that previous FBI leadership secretly subpoenaed my own phone records, along with those of now White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, using flimsy pretexts and burying the entire process in prohibited case files designed to evade all oversight." The news comes as Patel continues to purge the Bureau of agents who worked on investigations into President Trump. Yesterday, the Bureau fired around 10 additional agents who had worked on that classified documents case.
Now, despite Patel and Wiles' outrage, the New York Times reports these revelations may only be news to them. The Times writes, it has been known for years that Mr. Patel was closely scrutinized by investigators under the special counsel Jack Smith and was compelled to testify in front of a grand jury. The fact that investigators obtained some of Ms. Wiles' phone records was made public during the inquiry into Mr. Trump's mishandling of classified documents. According to their report, Patel came under scrutiny after it emerged that he had come to Mr. Trump's aid after the FBI searched Mr. Trump's residence in August 2022, and the subpoena for Ms. Wiles' records was largely restricted to her communications with lawyers working for Trump or witnesses in the Trump cases. Meantime, former DOJ Director of Public Affairs Anthony Cooley dismissed the news as pretext for arresting Jack Smith. He told Axios that Patel is, quote, on a singular mission to find something, anything for which to prosecute Jack Smith. That's what Donald Trump demanded, and that's what he and Attorney General Pam Bondi are trying to deliver. Oh,
this
man.
continues.
I was like, this always is about being surveilled. I'm definitely not for as consistent surveillance state, but I know that subpoenas are lawful and they're a legitimate part of a criminal investigation, right? I know that it was phone metadata, from what I understand, that they are always collecting phone data in national security cases for the most part. It's not like a rare thing that they attacked them, and they explain both of their connections, and Susie Wiles talking to the lawyers, and exactly Kash Patel's close association with Trump, and how right after Mar-a-Lago was reviewed, he was in close contact with him. So maybe that's what they were looking for. I understand the frustration of Susie Wiles and Kash Patel, but I think, for Kash Patel to get in his office and just go off and start firing people, we know he fired 10 more people, but fired people that were actually doing their job. I think that is polarizing itself, because a lot of people, even current FBI agents, were defending the people that got fired, saying they were following through with orders that they thought were impartial because it was an active investigation. So I don't think that the proper retaliation or response to what happened historically in the FBI is something where you should just make it very biased towards people who have an affinity to you.
I think Trump and Republicans would argue that the FBI has been very biased against them, and that this is yet again another weaponization of the federal government against political adversaries by the previous administration. We know that the Trump administration was surveilled previously. We know that their campaign was surveilled previously. We know that there has been an ongoing investigation and that it has been hidden. And it continues to give Republicans the us versus them. This is the deep state. And people called Trump so crazy for saying there was a deep state, that there were all these nefarious actors. And it continues to come to light that they have been targeting Republicans and targeting those associated with President Trump. So Republicans will continue to stand up and say, this is not okay. You are using the federal government to try and enact political retribution. And on Kash Patel firing the 10 agents, I don't know what those agents did. I don't know what the cause is. It might be like a Michael Scott, The Office, it's because I hate them firing. Who knows what the cause is of it? But I just heard Democrats put out a video from the Hill about don't follow illegal orders. And if these orders that these agents were given were in fact improper and not supposed to be done, then they should be held to account for that. And Democrats should applaud it. But again, everybody immediately gets into their political corners, puts their jersey on and says, oh, Kash Patel should have known. Oh, Susie's fine. Everything's fine. This isn't a big deal. It is a big deal. These were private citizens of the United States who were being surveilled by the federal government for their association and work with the former president of the United States. That's a big deal, and we should continue to shine light on it.
So the president campaigned on the idea that he was a victim of this political system, right? You just talked about many ways that the political system was used in ways against the president. The president has returned to office after campaigning that way and saying he's going to break down the bureaucracy and essentially done the same exact thing, continuing on the games. I mean, we saw the tweet that was not supposed to be public directly to Pam Bondi saying, go after Letitia James. And then you saw them try to go after
Letitia James, but that's a separate.
But now he's trying to go after her for her connection with her hairdresser. I mean, it's getting out of hand.
Breaking the rules or breaking the rules.
But her hairdresser breaking the rules has nothing to do with her. I mean,
but her prosecutorial misconduct in New York has been egregious, and there are plenty of reasons.
She prosecuted him in a civil trial. He's trying to put the woman in jail for giving her niece her house.
He tried to put her in jail, and if she committed fraud, abso-freaking-lutely.
So the point is, he's still doing the same political retribution that he campaigned against. So what's the difference between the same, like you said, Republicans who felt attacked by the system that now create a system that is set up to attack Democrats? I don't see how that would be.
I do not believe in political retribution using the federal government. I do believe in being able to investigate and hold people to account of both parties. And Letitia James has been scot-free in the state of New York. And for time and again, and her level of prosecutorial misconduct is lucky that more cases haven't been overturned in that state. That woman should not have a job, let alone any crime she broke. There's no problem with an investigation. I've got no problem with it. I don't know why anybody else would. Is it because she's a Democrat? Is that why it's a problem? Because I think Letitia James should be investigated for a number of reasons. And if she's broken the law, absolutely. So if that is what the government should do, it should do it. It shouldn't be used as political retribution. I can agree with that. But just because we're investigating Democrats doesn't mean it's political retribution.
Yeah, but a lot of signs point to the fact that Trump is not
he
just
holds
going
a grudge
down
like a handbag.
Yeah, hold it like this is point
every
to
day of his life.
Right. Okay, there's some grudges in here.
Oh, totally.
So we have to admit that. That's all I want to say is that if he actively campaigned on not doing that, he should prosecute people that he feels like have actually done something wrong, as opposed to I'm about to get you back.
Well, I don't think it's always necessarily I got you back or I'm going to get you back, but I do think that the president is using the levers available to him to make sure that there are investigations into Democrats for wrongdoing.
All right, up next, surprising move from Netflix as the streaming giant officially dropped out of the race to acquire Warner Brothers. We'll be right back to talk about that. After months of negotiations and dragging us all through them, Netflix has bowed out of the fight to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery, and Paramount is the last man standing. News of Netflix's announcement that it would not match Paramount's bid came just minutes after Warner Brothers president David Zaslav said Paramount's offer was, quote, superior. Netflix said in a statement, quote, the deal is no longer financially attractive, so we are declining to match the Paramount Skydance bid. This transaction was always a, quote, nice to have at the right price, not a, quote, must have at any price.
Netflix reached an $83 billion deal in December to acquire a large portion of Warner Brothers, but Paramount eventually submitted a revised offer of $111 billion.
But it's not a done deal yet. California Attorney General Rob Bonta wrote on X, quote, Paramount Warner Brothers is not a done deal. These two Hollywood titans have not cleared regulatory scrutiny. The California Department of Justice has an open investigation, and we intend to be vigorous in our review. Last year, David Ellison, the CEO of Paramount, installed Bari Weiss as the editor-in-chief of CBS News. Some have raised alarm over the fact that if Paramount does acquire Warner Brothers, CNN would be under Ellison's control. Ellison and his father, David Ellison, have spent time with Trump recently, with Ellison attending the State of the Union this week. There's so much here. I think outside of the political stuff, I just really wanted Netflix to win this bid. I think because I just thought it would be a cool new space for Netflix to jump in, to see what they would do with programming.
Right, and they mentioned, CNN is part of this deal in the Warner Brothers thing. CNN does really good documentaries. That would have been a great pull over to Netflix. That really would have, there would have been a lot of nice marrying up there, but they did get outbid, and at a certain point, you can't just say, okay, well, we liked you a little more, so we're going to give you the deal because you have stakeholders. So they have to go, to the larger deal on this.
But I think what the stakeholders have to consider is like the long-term effects of content. So when you have something as big as Paramount taking over something as big as Warner Brothers, there's a lot of overlap there on what they do. Whether you talk about talk shows, when you talk about movies and the amount of them being made, when you talk about news operations, what does this mean for a lot of people? I know a lot of friends that work within these spaces are worried about, I don't know if I'm going to have a job after this merger goes through, because why would we ever, there's always going to be layoffs. But with Netflix, because it was such a new entity acquiring an entity that had nothing to do with what they currently do, there probably would be a lot of facilitating people staying so that they could do it right, since these people have done it for years. As we've seen with the Paramount takeover, even with Barry Weiss, who I was happy to see her in that position, I think there's still been a lot of, we're doing it this way, and if you're uncomfortable with it, get out of the door.
Yeah, to your point about the overlap and how that's going to restructure things, yeah, I think the news divisions are something that is going to be absolutely massive. Now, this does all have to clear regulatory scrutiny. To the Attorney General of California's point, I don't know that it will, because you might get into a number of legal issues on it. But if it does go through, you will see a shakeup in two really core news institutions in our country. And what does that mean? Are they going to go into one? Are they going to stay separate? Or will they try to sell off different assets, including other portions of the news division, to see what they can do to kind of make this deal work for how they see Paramount going in the future?
And that's still a whole scary thing, because, NBC Universal just did that spinoff.
Right.
And a lot of my friends, I started my career at MSNBC, to be transparent. And I think when everyone saw that happening, they're like, what does this mean? Like, are we the stepchildren? Are we going to be taken care of under Versant? Like, what does this mean? Luckily, it's working out now, but I think the investors, the money it makes in the first 5 years, will all be telltale signs about how much is invested in past that. And not just MS Now, but also all the other entities that are not Bravo, that they spun off out of that company, like Sci-Fi and, all the channels that we used to grow up watching. And I know times change. You got to move on sometimes from what you are used to. But I think I was so used to getting offered two different options, like ABC, CBS, like Paramount getting Warner Brothers seems like we're going to get more of what we used to get, and Netflix felt like the future.
Right, it felt different and exciting, and it felt like a new format for something that really could use a new format sometimes, right? This is a very big deal. There's a lot of entities that sit within it, so giving a bit more of that outsidery feel from something like Netflix, which is a newer institution versus Paramount in this country, would have been really exciting to see. And I think at the end of the day, you will see, if this goes through, an absolutely massive shakeup in American news and American news politics, because of what will likely happen between the CBS and CNN portions of this.
Right, and I also loved Netflix statement. Like, it was like, if you get broken up with, but you're like, and I wasn't even that interested.
Listen, I was here because it made sense, not because I wanted to.
Right, it was very much like, oh, we're good. Enjoy. Okay, well, I had a great time with you today. Come back anytime, please. That does it for us on Rising Live. Please look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll see you next week. It's Friday.
Friday.